Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse Sessions. I'm always excited when I get to meet new friends, and I'm also excited when I get to bring in friends of friends. So I want to introduce my new friend, Mark, to the conversation, and I want to thank Hamish Knox for bringing us together. Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about what a negotiation ninja is, and let's start with who you are as a human being.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate you having me on, and shout out to Hamish. Good guy, friend to many, enemy of none. I am a negotiations expert. My job is to teach and train and coach people on how to negotiate to either maximize revenue or reduce cost or reduce risk. Largely, we deal with family enterprise on the Summit Crown side of our business, or we deal with enterprise negotiations on the Negotiations Ninja side. So on Negotiations Ninja, it's training enterprise level procurement and sales teams. And on Summit Crown, it's working with family enterprise leaders to reduce conflict in their organizations.
I love it. And by the way, if somebody has family in their business and they haven't had conflict, they're not taking business seriously because it's one of those inevitables, I think. I'm fascinated, and maybe we can start there. I see a lot of families where parents started it, now they're on second generation.
Yeah.
What's unique to that? Because honestly, everyone I've seen, there's been everything gets along well, everybody's great, and then at some point, the second generation comes up with new ideas, and the first generation says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa."
Yes. So when you think about it, a lot of this has to do with identity. First generation who has started the business, the founder of the business, is typically a trailblazer, a visionary, someone has probably started multiple businesses that they've been involved in. This one hit, it's grown, you're bringing in the family. Second generation might be ready, they think, to lead. And they have all these new ideas, but what you have to realize is that there's an identity problem that exists with the first generation of like, okay, if I am no longer the visionary, if I am no longer the person who's paving the way, if I'm no longer the person who has the new ideas, who am I really? And so when a lot of 2G second generations or G2, depending on which way you want to look at it, come in, they say, I don't know why dad won't listen to me. I don't know why mom's being so obtuse. I have no idea why. They just can't get it into their heads. What you have to realize as a second generation is that the first generation's blood, sweat, tears, time, and effort have gone into this. And control and identity are a big part of that. And your job as the second generation is to, yes, come up with new ideas to take the business forward, but also to recognize that it's not as simple as just implementing the new idea. You also have to try and steward around the identity problems and talk about the identity problems.
I love that. And I think the one I will bring up that was most fascinating to me was a mom, her daughter, and her daughter from a second marriage. So two half sisters.
Yeah.
And both were college level athletic competitors. Oh my God, there was hair pulling. I'm not kidding.
I bet there was, right? Two highly competitive kids that want to be involved for the right reasons.
Yep.
And sometimes the parents are stewarding those relationships as well. So you've got this issue where, mom is stewarding one daughter who is fighting with the other daughter, and they're trying to manage that relationship while these two daughters are trying to impose their ideas or move their ideas forward or take control of the business or manage succession. And it's a bit of a dance as to how we have those conversations. But the first conversation is talking about acknowledging that there is a conversation that needs to take place. And most people don't want to do that. Most people actually avoid the conversation to begin with, Jeff. You would be maybe not surprised, but I think a lot of listeners might be surprised by people avoiding conflict in general because they believe that it'll either just go away or we'll deal with it later, or this is not a big issue right now, so why even talk about it? And they just avoid everything.
I use the analogy of the old steam kettle. You can pretend it's not there. We can all ignore it, but at some point it's going to bubble over and make some noise. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of negotiating, is recognizing that you need to have some difficult conversations. And if you keep avoiding them, that's where your real problems come from.
Yeah. What happens in a lot of conflict, Jeff, is that because of avoidance, what started out essentially as a small problem eventually grows and grows and grows. And it's like a really crappy version of interest, right? Like interest compounds, conflict also compounds, but in the bad way. And so one issue compounds on top of another, which compounds on top of another. And what started out potentially as a small problem that could have been dealt with maybe in 2 or 3 conversations is now metastasized like a cancer into something much bigger. And by the time that people actually get around to dealing with the issue, it's usually when that issue has started to explode in different areas. And usually it's a big explosion. And that's when we get the phone call to be like, hey, we're having a big explosion. Come and help us resolve this acute conflict. And then we come in and address the situation, resolve the acute conflict, and then just say, hey, this isn't the only problem that you have. This is a symptom of something that most likely was ignored for a very, very long time. And there are other things that we have to work through here. And as we work through those problems, then communication flows a lot better and communication gets a lot better. But it's not an easy process, and no one actually wants to be in conflict, but it is important to deal with it.
I love that. And I'm picturing people are calling you. You're the firefighters after the building has exploded and burnt to the ground. We're going to talk about structure of negotiating. We'll get there in a second. But first, rather than waiting till the building burnt down and we got to come in and fix it, how can people recognize that they've got conflict festering? Because I'm going to guess that most people deep in their gut, they know, oh, I don't want to have this conversation. I should have it. I don't want to have it. But what's a real sign that they should have called you yesterday, not today?
Yeah. My main message is deal with it as early as humanly possible. So if you notice that there is, and we're not talking about a disagreement, right? Because disagreements are normal. What we're talking about is something that continues to repeat, probably more than twice. That's sort of where you have to start going, okay, maybe there's something here that we have to address. And the key here is to name it. So many people avoid conflict because they don't know how to say the words of like, okay, this is a problem. We should talk about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best wording ever. Now, obviously, it helps if you've got the right words, which we can talk about. But just naming that there is an issue helps, right? Because you're surfacing something that is a concern, you're surfacing something that is a problem, and you do have to deal with it at that point because you have surfaced it. Now you've done your work. You've surfaced the issue. Now you've got to actually work through the issue. When you surface the issue, how you surface the issue, that's really important. But it shouldn't, not having the perfect words shouldn't stop you from surfacing the issue.
So, Mark, you don't know this, but I'm autistic. So I'm very candid. And I've been guilty. I'm in meetings and I'm like, I can see the tension. And I assume everybody knows it's there. So I name it. And it's like, whoops.
It's a good trait to have, Jeff, because if you don't do that in a lot of meetings, a lot of the time what gets unsaid results in significant problems later on. And sometimes it gets unsaid because of a variety of different reasons. You know, maybe there's like a cultural taboo around it in the organization, or they've addressed this at a previous time and it didn't work when they addressed it at a previous time. And, you know, maybe someone got hurt in the process, or it could be whatever, right? There's so many different reasons that come up as a result, but naming it is the most important thing. And by the way, how you name it is really, so if I have a conflict with you, for example, and I feel like there's some frustration or anger that you have towards me, I'm not going to say, hey, Jeff, you're being a real dick right now, right? Like that's
You
not
could.
how.
I would accept it, but yes,
That's
I
not
know.
how we name the conflict, right? I don't want to accuse you of something.
Yeah.
I might say, hey Jeff, I have observed that, or I've noticed that there might be a feeling of frustration. What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? That's how we want to do it, because now I'm taking ownership of the observation. I'm not saying you are, I'm saying I have observed, I feel like I have noticed. When I do that, then I can claim responsibility for that. Now, what I like to add on to that is I like to add on like a, did I get that right phrase? Hey, Jeff, I've observed that you might feel frustrated, or there's a feeling of frustration with this conversation or with me. Did I get that right? Now I'm giving you the out, right? So not only have I not accused you, but I've also given you the opportunity to say, nah, it's not that I'm frustrated, Mark, because I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. It's not that I'm frustrated, it's that I'm pissed off with this situation. Okay, let's talk about it. What's going on with that situation? Now we can actually get into it, because if even if you correct me, that's great, because now we're still getting to the bottom of the issue.
Well, it's funny because I think a lot of people start with "you are" statements, and I think
Yes.
that's probably the fastest way to shut down any hope of compromise. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we start accusing someone of something, they get defensive, right? You are frustrated. You are a jerk. You are angry. Now I am naming you the emotion. Now, naturally, you feel you need to defend yourself in the process, right? That fight, flight, or freeze situation starts kicking in. Most people, especially at an executive or an entrepreneur level, they're going to fight. They're going to fight back. And when they fight back, it's not pretty, right? We don't want them to be defensive. We need them to be more open so that the conversation can be more productive. So how we name the issue is very important.
I'm just having a moment here. I'm recalling some of the conversations with my second generation with the sisters, and it was fascinating because the fight was never about whatever the thing was that somebody said it was about. It would always go back to, when I was 5, you took my doll away, and I was like, oh, didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
But it's all that unresolved stuff in a family.
I heard of
right?
a situation the other day where, large organization, a multi like $10 million organization, the G2 were fighting about, how one of them stole mom's flower pots, at when they were like 7 or 8, and broke the flower pots. And obviously the issue is not about that, but there's so much emotion tied into, okay, well, they got away with that when I was a kid, and I've always felt like they were the favorite, and now I'm not getting recognized for the effort that I'm putting into it, and this is just another example of how you broke mom's flower pots and got away with it, right? And so those kinds of situations come up very often, and that's just the conversation that they're talking about is usually a symptom of something much deeper that we need to get into a deep conversation about.
I find it amazing how much energy people will expend to avoid an awkward conversation. Yet when you have that conversation, usually it loses its charge. Is that sort of what you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%. So we're Harry Potter fans in my house. So if you think of like, this is Voldemort, right? When you name the name Voldemort, fantastic. So when you like Voldemort in Harry Potter universe represents fear, right? And so when you name fear, the fear loses its power over time. If you notice at the beginning of the story, everyone's really afraid to say the name. Ooh, you said his name. Or why? Wow. Ooh, you're so brave to say his name. But the more and more people say it, the more that fear loses its power, and the more Voldemort sort of loses his power as well. The same thing is true in conflict. When we name it, it loses its power over time.
I love it. And for what it's worth, I am a massive, massive fan of Rowling's analysis of the human. If you look at it as analogies, she's pretty bang on about how humanity is. And I love that. I think there's actually a line where somebody says, "You may as well use his name. He's going to try to kill you anyways."
Right, exactly. Exactly. And
So
that's exactly
it
true.
becomes a joke, right?
Yeah. And also when you name it, Jeff, you're naming the issue, and you're at that point you're starting to separate the person from the problem. Right. And so if you ever read any work of William Ury or Bill Patton or any of those guys, the guys that sort of wrote Getting to Yes and all those sorts of things, they talk about separating the person from the problem in any kind of conflict. That's super important, because the person is probably not the problem. There is probably something separate to that we need to do. And as soon as we can name that, then it becomes easier to create that separation. Because if you don't create that separation, then you're just dealing with a personal issue.
I love that. And I think I've worked with quite a few. I accidentally had a niche for a while. It seemed like all of my clients were second generation. And it was fascinating because I had every blend of father, son, father, daughter, mother, son, mother, daughter. And it was always, yes, the founder identity was who am I now?
Yes.
But there was also a lack of awareness about the second generation. A lot of them fought you're the founder's owner, founder's child. So you're nepotism. And it's like, I actually was in one meeting where a longtime senior manager quit, and he said, "I'm not working for the founder's baby." And I was like, ooh. But, the staff hadn't seen, they watched this kid grow up and wander around the building in diapers. They couldn't take them seriously in the boardroom.
Yeah. I heard someone say the other day, it's pretty hard to take advice from someone whose diapers you've changed.
Yeah.
And that's fair, right? When you think about it from that perspective, but what you also have to recognize is that person is no longer the child that you may have once seen, or that you may have once seen. And wouldn't you rather work for someone who's genealogically invested in the business than someone who's not? Right? Someone who has actual legacy ties to the business, who is emotionally invested fully into the business, versus someone who's just out to maximize return to shareholder. And that's, I think, a lot of people who look at family businesses, they think, oh, I don't want to work for that person's kid. But I think I'd much rather do that, because I know there's a higher likelihood that person is going to be fully invested into the organization and not just maximizing for profits. I had a conversation with someone the other day where they had to invest a significant sum of capital into their business to recalibrate a whole second generation. The conversation had been ignored by the first generation. Succession had passed. Control had been passed to the second generation. They knew they had to deal with this issue. They knew they had to invest a ton of money, a ton of capital. And they made the decision, and they said, look, we're not going to get a return on this for at least 4 years, but it's the right thing to do. Now, they could have run it exactly how they wanted it, maximize profits for the next 3 years, and sold the business and made a ton of money. But they chose not to, because it wasn't the right thing to do. They wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to do the right thing for their family's legacy. They wanted to do the right thing for the employees. And so they chose to invest that money. And we see that happen in family businesses all the time. They will take the short-term hit to create the long-term success for the employees and for the business. And that's beautiful, right? That to me is what capitalism is about.
Well, and to that point, I think when you're dealing with second generation owners, they're also less likely to make blanket layoffs in the name of profit, because those people changed my diapers. There's a community element to it.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right. Well, we're going to shift gears, because I think I'm a big believer in structure, systems, whatever you want to call it. What do you see as a valuable structure for negotiations? And quite frankly, I don't think everybody recognizes when they're actually negotiating. So what advice would you give for a founder who's looking at some difficult decisions?
Yeah, most founders are winging it, Jeff. unfortunately. Because they don't plan for their negotiations, because they've been successful at scaling a business, and they think that scaling the business is the same as negotiating, and it's not. And so growth has allowed them the confidence that they think they're great at negotiations. Most of them are not. So when we're thinking about negotiations, a very, very simple structure just first starts with understanding, what do you want to get out of this deal? Step one. Now, when I say that to founders, I hear from founders, I want to get the deal. To which my answer is, that's not an answer. That actually
That's a terrible answer.
That doesn't make any sense, right? They're like, well, no, I have to have this deal. I'm like, okay, but at any cost? And they're like, well, no. Okay, well, exactly. That's what we have to define. So what is it? Yes, getting the deal is the outcome. But what constitutes good? Like, how do we know what good is in this negotiation? And so what I'm asking them to define is, what does good mean for you? Now they may say, well, Mark, I want to get something that creates a positive ROI. I want to get something that reduces risk. I want to get something that improves communication. I want to get something that creates a long-term relationship. Great. Now we're getting down to some rough ideas of what good actually means. We call those aspirational goals in our negotiation. So if you have an aspirational goal, think of it as like visionary, directional, sets us in the right forward direction. We're ready to go. But in and of themselves, even though they set the right direction, they don't have enough teeth in them for us to actually make them actionable. It would be like saying at the beginning of the year in January, like most of the Western world sets the major aspirational goal of losing weight on January 1st, right? Which is a phenomenal aspirational goal, and it sets you in the right direction, but it doesn't really give you anything to kind of focus on. Yes, you have a direction, but what next? So a big part of that is now deciding, okay, how do I break that down into something that I can actually negotiate into the deal? So if you say, well, Mark, I want to create a long-term relationship out of this negotiation. Okay, great. That's one of the aspirational goals. What does a good long-term relationship mean to you? So now we have to define what that actually means. And then we've got to break that down into its component parts. Because you might say, well, it's something that's profitable over the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, good. We communicate on a quarterly basis about all the areas where we're doing well and where we need to improve. Okay, good. We meet occasionally with our families to ensure that we have good ties. Okay, good. Our employees are respectful to each other so that we can continue to work together in peace and harmony. Okay, good. We have a good conflict resolution and dispute resolution clause in our contract should things get out of hand. Okay, good, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so now we're starting to talk about what are the components that actually make up a good relationship. I'm reminded of a conversation once that I had with 2 partners, romantic partners and business partners in a deal. And they were talking about communication. And, the one partner said to the other partner and did the right thing and said, look, I don't think we're communicating. This relationship isn't going well. We're not communicating well. Did the right thing. Surfaced the issue. The other partner said, you know what? I think you're right. I also don't think that we're communicating with each other. Like relief, common ground, right? And you would think at that point, amazing, we've talked about it. And then both of them agreed, like, okay, we need to improve on our communication. Yes, we need to improve our communication. Good, great. Hug, best makeup sex ever. They leave. Phenomenal.
Next day, repeat.
Yeah. And now they're getting a divorce 6 months later and the business is getting split up. What happened? Well, yes, they acknowledged that communication was the thing that they wanted to work on, the aspirational goal that we talked about at the beginning. But they didn't talk about what that communication actually meant to either of them. So even if we set the goal of like, okay, I want to create this long-term relationship with this deal that I'm going into, and here are the component pieces of that long-term relationship, we also have to think about what the counterparty wants out of that, talk to them about what we want and what they want, and then come to a conclusion. Because if you just say, hey, we want to create a long-term relationship, the counterparty's like, good, yeah, me too. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, yes, we kind of talked about it, but not really. Right. So first understanding what you want and then breaking it down into things that we can actually negotiate into a deal. That's the first two steps of that. Once you've done that, it comes down to understanding what the other person wants.
And I would be willing to bet that the first step and probably the second are the ones that everybody wants to skip past because, well, you used the word communication. I used the word communication. Let's keep going. And you and I both know what happens when you use the word assume.
Yes, exactly correct. And unfortunately, most people just sort of glaze over it, Jeff. What they're doing is like, oh, we're aligned. Well, hang on. We need to dig into that. Okay, what does communication mean to you?
Yeah.
Oh, good question. I've actually never thought of that before. Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that, right? Let's brainstorm what communication actually means.
Yeah.
Now, once we can do that, then it becomes easier to actually put a deal in place that makes sense for both parties. The same thing is true for like very simple agreements. I mean, I got a confidentiality agreement from an organization this morning. They sent it to me and they said, sign off on this confidentiality agreement. And there were a few places that were vague in the agreement. And I said, hey, I need some clarity on these. What does this mean? What does that mean? What do these things mean over here? And they were like, oh, actually, we've never had anyone ask us that before. We'll have to get back to you. I'm like, oh,
no one's read the agreement before.
No one's actually read the agreement before. Oh.
You know, it's funny. I worked with a sales leader once, and he was always, oh, we got to get these win-win deals. You know, you got to go out and help the clients and win-win. And I was watching how he papered deals and how he administered. And I said, could you tell me what you mean by win-win? And he said, well, the company gets the deal and I get my bonus. And I went, oh crap, you and I are so different right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, win-win unfortunately has become a marketing tagline, right? Yeah. It's a nice, I bristle quite a bit with the terminology win-win because it's so undefined and people have so many different perspectives of it. You know, and that's why I think like a really good point of clarification is like, what does that actually mean for you?
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is just having the conversation. If I say the word win-win, what does that mean from your perspective? And this is the part I see with a lot of entrepreneurs. They've never stopped to think about what a win for them is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they don't even, Jeff, they don't even know what they want, most of them.
Yeah. Oh, I network all the time, Mark, and I am amazed how many people can't tell me who they serve and what they do for them. Yeah. And I'm like, that's kind of the fundamental one thing you need to know in business.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, if that's not clear, then it makes your negotiations without a purpose, right? We're just doing deals for the sake of doing deals. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? And now we're getting ourselves into a situation where what happens, unfortunately, is like you've got, you know, key in family businesses, you know, G2 or G3 puts a deal together they think is fantastic, take it to the board, take it to, you know, the parents who are probably the chairs at this point in time. And they say, hey, we got this great deal. And then the chairs say, hey, like, that's actually not what we want at all. Like, you didn't think about this, you didn't think about that. And, you know, you think you're aligned to the company's purpose, you think you're aligned to the company's objectives, but you just start making assumptions about it. And so a lot of, especially in family businesses, you take a lot for granted, you assume a lot because you think you know, because you've grown up around it. Yeah. But you should probably have been checking with your internal group, your board, your chairs, whoever it might be, first to understand what their goals are first. And by the way, they might not know. So you're going to have quite a long conversation with them about that, of like, okay, what do we actually want to get out of this? Then go and negotiate.
I love it. And by the way, I come from a marketing and sales background. I'm told all the time I do it wrong because I start with the stakeholders and I look at what each of them wants to get out of something. And then I decide, do we even talk about doing a deal or do we walk away? And all the sales literature out there is you got to close, close, close. And I'm like, no, some of the best deals are the ones I walked away from because I knew it wasn't a fit.
Yeah. Let me reassure you, you're doing it the right way. So for those people that have corrected you, they are incorrect. You're doing it the correct way.
They teach and have many books on the subject, and I just grind my teeth and go, I'm going to walk away here because we're not going to get along. But
yeah, it doesn't make sense to do a deal that doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. So like, why would I go into a deal that doesn't fit my purpose of my organization? Like I had a situation once where I had a sales VP who was doing a deal with someone that was so clearly far outside of their ICP that I was like, hey, how does this fit into the strategy, like at all? And he said, well, this is a great deal, right? We're going to make a lot of money. I was like, and also, how does it fit into the strategy of growth for the, are you opening up a new market segment here? Yeah. Is that the intent of this? He's like, well, no, this is just like a really good opportunity. I was like, this doesn't make any sense, man. I think you that really need to look at whether or not you should do this deal. But yeah, but we're going to make so much money. I get that. You're going to make a lot of money, but you're also going to have to service this customer.
Yeah.
Do you
There's always that follow-up cost.
Yeah. Do you want to service this? You don't know anything about their industry. They're way outside of your ICP. You're going to have to hire people that do know about their industry to be able to do this. The servicing costs on this are going to be enormous. Have you thought about the servicing costs? Oh, I guess so. Yeah. Okay.
I love, so I'm seeing a lot of interesting overlap here between negotiating and marketing and sales, because honestly, I think I would envision that marketing and sales is sort of the early round of negotiating. Yes. You know, you want to be clear on
they're all founded on the same principles, Jeff. I mean, whether it's negotiation or marketing or sales, they're all founded on persuasion and influence, right? Yeah. And we can't persuade or influence anyone unless we understand what it is we actually want. The same thing is true for marketing. The same thing is true for sales. The same thing is true for negotiation.
I love that. And I think I'm seeing, the common golden thread is communication. Mm-hmm. But I'm also fascinated by the role of identity because Hamish and I, we've talked about identity versus role many times, and a lot of salespeople get stuck in their head and say, I'm not meeting my quota, therefore I'm a loser. Yeah. And it's like, you need to separate that. Yeah. I'm fascinated.
Hard to do, but very important.
Well, and when it comes to family, I'm guessing it's just that much harder because you got all these little mental triggers that you wouldn't have with a stranger.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about how that person has been brought up, the business has been talked about at the dinner table their entire lives. Yeah. It is part of the family as much as they are part of the family. And sometimes, separating family from business is almost impossible for family organizations. And still, it's really important because you still need to be able to have a functioning family relationship with someone outside of a business if you disagree with them at the board level, right? Your kids still need to be able to play with their kids, right? Like my brother and I, for example, if we were in business and we disagreed with something, our kids still need to be able to play together, right? That's still more important, in my opinion. So
a friend of mine calls it the Thanksgiving test. He's like, if this is going to ruin Thanksgiving, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say avoid the conversations if it's going to create trouble in Thanksgiving. I just say address the conversations so that Thanksgiving is better.
Yeah. His approach is we won't do deals if it impacts Thanksgiving. So there's a very hard family line.
Yeah, I can see that. Sometimes, especially with like families that have gone into multiple generations and have multiple branches of the family, you're going to run into that. And unfortunately, especially when you're talking about second cousins and those kinds of things that have ownership stakes in the business, those things will inevitably pop up. So you still have to have those conversations, even if it does make personal conversations a little bit more difficult, because the conversation still has to happen for the good of the
funny.
business.
Some of the most interesting business partnerships I've seen have been couples. For some reason, intergenerational, they find a way, but couples, either it works really well or it is, oil and water and they do not mix. And it's just fascinating. But again, it's separating, here I'm the CEO, here I'm the husband or wife. You got to be clear about the role in the identity.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to governance structure that you have within the organization, how we have conversations, when we have conversations, and creating formal lines of dispute to be able to happen. Now, look, you're going to, obviously, something's going to come up at the dinner table or whatever it is, but try as best you can to be able to separate those so that you can have a reasonable conversation. Compartmentalization is key. Think of yourself as like Jason Bourne. Right? being able to have those separate parts are very, very important.
I love that. Well, I could talk about this all day, but I want to get into your book. I know you have a book, so tell us about your book, please.
9 Secrets to Win Deals and Influence Stakeholders. It's basically my attempt to show people how to structure negotiations correctly. And it's been very, very successful. Bestseller on Amazon for a while, and has helped a large number of organizations change the way that they're negotiating. I'm currently in the throes of contemplating a second book on conflict resolution. I don't know if I will, Jeff, if I'm honest. It's quite a painful process to write a book. And so I am contemplating it, though. But yes, that book was quite successful at teaching people how to structure their negotiations.
I love it. And Mark, I feel I have a moral obligation to tell you, if you write a second book, at some point it becomes addictive.
I've been told that. I don't know how it could be. The first book was so painful that I don't know if I'd ever do it again.
Well, I'll tell you this just because I think it's funny, but the first book for me took me 2 years. I wanted to harm physically my editor. They were driving me nuts.
Yeah, I've had that feeling.
The second book, I ignored the editor and I just did my thing. And then I started to feel a little bit free. But by the third book, I went, oh, here's how I write. Because for the record, when you wrote your first book, you wrote it the way somebody else told you to. Whether you know it or not, you had a high school English teacher, somebody told you this is what writing looks like.
Right.
And so to most people, writing is painful. I see writing as organizing my ideas and sharing my thoughts. It is surprisingly easy when you don't listen to the voices in your head. But again, it's also about having a clear goal. Why do you want to write the book in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. You know what, the next book I write, if I write the next book on conflict resolution, it's going to be about why to have the conversation. I think there's a lot of books that address how, but there's not a lot of books that address why. And then I'd love to give some examples of like families that have done it well. Not perfectly, because no family is perfect, but there are some clear examples in history of families that have done it well. So I'd love to talk about that.
Well, and I think that's, if you go to the nobility and the royalty in certain countries, they raise the next generation to be stewards of the family name, the family fortune. We're not really good at that in North America. We're all about today.
Yes.
We're not looking at intergenerational stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got to think about our families intergenerationally. And one of the big things that shifted my perspective in my work with families is how successful families think, not just of the immediate net profit of the business, but how each of their decisions not only affects them, but their kids, their kids' kids, and their kids' kids' kids, right? They're thinking 50 years ahead on some of these major decisions, and it's refreshing and beautiful.
You know, it's funny, in Calgary, in one of the malls, there's a First Nations quote, and it says, "We don't inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children."
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Chinook
I,
Mall, I can't remember which part of it, but it used to be up in the ceiling.
I wrote something similar the other day that said something to the effect of, look, you are a descendant, but you are also an ancestor.
Mhm.
And so the decisions that you make today not only affect you, but affect your future generations.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of strange. People get weirded out by it, but I have two teenage boys and we have car coaching. So on the way to school, way home, whenever we're in the car together, I'll say, "I'm working on this. What do you guys think?"
I love that.
And people are like, "That's a weird thing to do." And I'm like, my kids love it. And, it's a zero stakes game, but they're learning to think like little entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And you're getting them involved so that they can start to think for themselves.
Yeah. And, it's fascinating because, they've got friends now that are starting to get minimum wage jobs. And I'm like, when I was young, 100 years ago, minimum wage was $4 an hour.
Right.
And I'd work 30 hours a week and I'd take home like $500 in the month. And,
yes.
Pre-tax. Sorry, I wouldn't take home 500. My question to them is, how could you do that in business without putting in the 40 hours?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love that you've got that card. I'm going to steal that. I hope you don't mind that, Jeff. I'm going to steal that idea.
My gift to anybody who loves their kids. I mean, it is, and for what it's worth, Mark, I always try to frame it in their video game world. So I'll say, okay,
Clever.
if you're,
I like that.
Because my youngest, he loves a video game. It's called Helldivers, and it's all about intergalactic war. And we're talking about, what are the economics of it, and he's learning about scarcity and resources because
neat.
You can only take so many weapons on a mission, and how much can you carry? I always tie it back to business, but they have no idea what I'm doing most of the time.
It's nice to relate it to things that they know about to make it more absorbable, right?
Well, and honestly, we started with Minecraft because it was always, if you're going to craft something, first you have to gather the resources, and then you need to know the formula, and it just kind of grew from there. The other thing we talk about a lot in the car is the Go-Giver and Bob Burg. So whether they know it or not, they're second generation Go-Givers. So
nice. I like it. My kids are into anime. I'm going to have to figure out how to relate it to them with anime.
Yeah. Love it. Well, I could talk to you all day, Mark. I will be mindful of your time. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, and find out what it's like to work with a negotiation ninja?
The easiest place is on LinkedIn. So you can just search my name on LinkedIn, find me there, connect with me there. Tell me that you listened to this podcast if you want to connect with me. And yeah, I'd love to connect with anyone who reaches out.
Love it. Well, thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. You run a phenomenal show. I'm very, very, very happy with this conversation.
Well, and we need to say thank you to Hamish as well. We love you, brother.
Yeah. Shout out Hamish.